How do you know the name of the first president of the United States? How do you know that? What makes you sure that there's a sun, a moon, and stars? How do you know what color my shirt is? All of these things actually are part of what we call psychology. That's what we're going to talk about in this course. So when we think about what is psychology, we have to break that word down. And you've probably heard of ology. That's the scientific study of something. And in this case, we're talking about psychology. And psyche is the soul. It's the sense of being. So when we think of scientific study of the sense of being, we're talking about the mind and the behavior. And as we look at that, this doesn't just come from the last 100 years. The study of psychology has been around for centuries. So going back actually all the way to Aristotle, questions that we've been asking for a long time is, what is thought? How do humans make choices? Is it A, B, or C? What is perception? Is there a reality? Or is reality really internal to the person? And what happens to that idea if you forget it? Is it really gone? Or is it still in there, somehow accessible? These are questions that have been going on in our conversations since the time of Aristotle. And these are the questions that are still a part of the study of psychology, the study of how we know, how we behave, how we think, how we are in relationship to our world. In the beginning of the more formalized study of psychology, it was this combination of physiology and philosophy. Philosophy is those great big philosophical questions. What is? What isn't? All of that aspect. And physiology is the study of the body. So as you go back to Aristotle, you can see he was doing some of both of those things. And as science developed, as technology increased, as questions were allowed to be researched and explored more deeply, this weaving together into a new science came about. Biology and philosophy are what formed into what we now understand as some of the foundational components of psychology. In the formal beginnings of psychology, we had what was called structuralism. Wilhelm Wundt is one of the first to be understood as building this lab that could look at how behaviors were understood, how we could recognize the structures of what was going on in the mind, and how this person was answering these questions for themselves. He understood through structuralism that the conscious experience was how we understood what was going on inside. But this wasn't enough of an answer. And functionalism came along to kind of counter and adapt with structuralism. And William James was one of the first psychologists in the US, and he's considered the father of psychology in the United States. But one of the things he came up with psychology was that it was a nasty little subject. All these questions and ultimately no solid answers, because humans are not easy to understand. So first we had structuralism, and then we had functionalism. And then at the same time, there were other ways of thinking. Ultimately, as we started merging into the early 1900s, what we saw was the emergence of what is known as psychoanalytic theory. And Freud is one of the biggest names associated with this. Certainly, Freud is not a favorite of many, but he is someone who was innovative and made us think about how we think, how we know, how we operate in our world more fully. One of the things that psychoanalytic theory gave us was this idea that we might have things under our consciousness that we aren't aware of. He gave us this idea of the subconscious. And so you might have seen that picture of a big iceberg. And we know that with icebergs that most of the substance of the iceberg is below the surface. And that image is frequently associated with Freud in terms of understanding that Freud said very little is known to us consciously. Much of it is repressed and under the surface. So what he brought about is that we could start understanding some of those subconscious components in how they're leaked out in expression in our conscious experiences. Along the same lines as psychoanalytic theory was Gestalt theory. And Gestalt psychology was focused on by 4 key players. We have Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kafka, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Lewin. And all of these innovators were part of what brought us the idea of the Gestalt. The Gestalt being that the sum is greater than the parts. So as we look at the whole of the parts, it doesn't equal 1 plus 1 equals 2. Frequently, when we think about the parts as a whole, it can equal 1 plus 1 equals 10. And so as we think about Gestalt theory, it helped us understand that there are pieces that we fill in automatically that make a bigger whole. Much like other sciences, psychology has seen incredible changes over the last decades. What started as a slow development from Aristotle over hundreds of years to the origins with Freud and these other key players has been just skyrocketing through these last 100 years. We have seen so many changes, particularly with the innovations that have come from science. And as we've seen those developments, we've been able to ask more questions, come up with more answers, which lead more to bigger questions. That is so much a part of what psychology is about these days. What we're going to talk about in this chapter is some of the other players, some of the other theories, and some of the directions that psychology has gone in. You're going to find out that psychology is a part of every day for every one of us. In all of our interactions, we have elements of the psychology, the science of the way we think, behave, and know in every day that we live.